Well, good afternoon. My name is Catherine Swift and I am the Chief Creative Director and CEO at Resin Obsession. And today I want to show you a little bit about how to sand resin smooth. So it's a question I get from time to time. You've got a resin piece, it's not necessarily even, or maybe there's some sharp edges and you want to know how can you sand your resin to get it smooth so that it not only has a nice surface to it, but it's not something that'll hurt somebody when they go to wear your resin jewelry piece. So before we get started with the sanding, there's a few things you need to know, or you need to have anyways. So right away, you need to have a dust mask, okay? Resin dust is not something you want to inhale. This is a dust mask that I got from the home improvement store. You can see it's got a little filter. You're gonna wear it securely. This part here at the top goes around your nose. You're gonna secure it to your face, and you want to wear this anytime you're working with resin dust. If you're working with a lot of dust, you're doing some big scale pieces, the same setup that you might use for a fume respirator. This is the respirator I wear for fumes, but you get different cartridges. So if you're going to do something like this, make sure the cartridges you get are good for resin dust particles, okay? Not all cartridges are meant for all purposes. So just make sure you get the right cartridges. And same thing, you want this mask to fit securely to your face because you don't want to be able to inhale air from around where it fits on your face instead of going through the particle filter first. So the next thing you're going to need is some wet dry sandpaper. You're going to want to start with something coarse. I generally start with something in the neighborhood of 150 to a 400 grit. This happens to be 150 grit paper. You're going to want to have this along with several other grits going from down to say like a 400, 600, 800, and then at least 1,000 to end with, maybe even a higher grit depending on what kind of finish you want. This is 1,000 grit paper. You can see the differences. This is a really coarse paper. This is a really fine paper. The coarse wet dry sandpaper you can get from multiple locations, including home improvement stores. The 1,000 grit and 1,500 grit, 2,000, you can generally find at an auto parts store back in their automotive detailing section. And then the other thing I like to use too are some super fine papers, and these are the 3M polishing papers. And I like these for getting a really super smooth, really matte, really velvety surface to resin jewelry. These are our 3M finishing papers. There's 6 different grits, and there's various sources where you can find these as well. So let me grab a piece here and we can get started. So if you look at this resin charm, it's not necessarily unusual. Sometimes when you're casting resin, it's going to have an edge, and this is partly from the resin shrinking a little bit as it cools, as it cures, and then partly because it just wants to ride up the side of the mold. It's not necessarily anything anybody's done wrong. It's just unfortunately kind of how physics works. So what I like to do, start with your wet dry sandpaper. Start with something coarse. You're going to want to get your piece wet, okay? 2 reasons for this. You don't want the friction from sanding to distort your piece in any way. Sometimes it can warm your resin and make it misshape. And the other thing too is keeping your piece wet means your dust will be wet, and so it's less likely you're going to inhale it. So get your piece wet. I've done it about 4 times already. And start sanding. And you want to hold your charm or whatever you're sanding, you want to hold it evenly and just go in one direction, and then at some point we can see we're making a little progress. You can dip it in your water again, get the dust off, and then go in another direction. So I'm going to now sand the opposite way. Okay. You can see it's starting to turn white, and that's just the dust combining with the water. You can also go, up and down, back and forth, do a little figure 8 motion. The key is that you want to change directions while you're sanding, because you'll find that you will hold it maybe not evenly, or maybe you're putting more weight on the piece on one side rather than the other. And so what you'll find is that you won't sand your piece flat, but you'll kind of sand it at an angle. And so you may find that all of a sudden you're like, oh, whoops, it's taller at one end than the other. So by changing directions, it minimizes the chance that that's going to happen. So once you have your piece sanded, at least to the point where you're happy with it, so let's take a look at this again. Let me dry this off. Then you start going down to the next lowest grit of sandpaper. So we'll look at this one. So you can see here, we've taken off the edge. Okay, so no more sharp edge that we have to worry about somebody hurting themselves with. However, you can see it's kind of frosty here. Now, you might like that. You might think that's a pretty cool effect, you know, and if this is where you want to stop, then that's great. Otherwise, you want to go to your next lowest grit of sandpaper, which in this case, because I started with a 150, I probably go down to a 400. So you might be asking, well, let's just speed this up and go directly to like 1,000 or a 2,000. You know, I wish it worked that way. I know that would be a lot quicker because nobody likes sanding, but you're not going to get out all this coarseness. It'll make it a little better, but it's not going to make it perfect. And so you really need to go down gradually with your grits of sandpaper to get it looking really nice and really smooth. Okay. All right. My little pro tip here is, if you're going to recoat this with another layer of resin, end with 1,000 grit or higher sandpaper. Otherwise, you're going to see the scratches underneath your new layer of resin. Okay. All right. So what do you do if you've got something you need to sand, like this cabochon that I cast? And you can see what happened was, so I overfilled the mold a little bit. So I've got this little edge here that I need to get rid of. So how are you going to sand that? So the way I like to do it is you want to sand with the curve of the charm. Okay. So you want to take and go with the curve. So it's like a flick of the wrist kind of thing. All right. And let me hold this on its side so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So what I'm doing here is I'm just sanding it like that along with the curve of the charm. And the reason you want to do it that way is, if you do it like this, or if you do it like this, you're going to end up with a bunch of like little edges along your resin charm, and you're still going to have to go back and even those out anyway. So same concept, just kind of go with the curve. All right. You know, and flip it around, change directions, and that gets you a nice, hopefully a nice curve. And same thing, start with coarse and then work your way down, and you're going to get, see, it's already looking better. Already looking good. So, okay. So you might be wondering, well, how would you sand a piece of resin artwork? And you can do that too. So sometimes you might find that you've got a painting you've done that just didn't quite work out the way you wanted. So perhaps, you know, maybe you didn't use enough resin and you got fish eyes, or you used some kind of disruption media to create cells and you got pockets, and so you're like, ah, criminy, now what am I going to do? So when it comes to sanding a flat piece of artwork, obviously you want to, just like you did with your resin charms, you want to make sure you've got it on a nice surface, or a flat surface, firm surface. You still want to make sure and wear your dust mask. And what I like to do is start with the same coarse grit of sandpaper again, and you can either buy something like a sanding block, or you can get a wood block, and you're going to do the same thing. I'm holding it here around the paper. Okay. We're going to put just a little bit of water on here because we don't want to inhale the dust. All right. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to sand back and forth, circles, or you can do a figure 8 motion. Okay. Now, one of my tricks that I like to do on sanding resin paintings that I learned from my metalsmithing days, for those of you who've ever sanded metal, it's the same concepts, but generally what I would do is try and make my sanding marks go in 2 different directions. So like maybe like, east-west, north-south. And then what I would do with the next grit of sandpaper is go opposite to that. And that way you'll know that you've gotten all your marks out from the previous grit of sandpaper. So that way, by the time you're done, hopefully you know without a doubt that you've got another really, really smooth surface that you can then either leave with that matte surface or you can recoat with another layer of resin. Okay. So sanding takes a while. I'm not gonna lie, it's not something I like to do. I don't know, I know there's a couple of you out there that like to sand, and I think it's probably a cry for help in some way because this is just horrible and boring and all that. Certainly there are power tools out there that can help you. The trick with them though is knowing when to stop, being careful that you don't take off too much, and obviously careful that you don't, hurt yourself or something like that. So same thing with resin paintings. Once you get down to 1,000 grit or higher, you should not see any sanding marks on your piece once you flood it with another layer of resin. And hopefully you will have the perfect resin piece the next time. Okay, all right, well, anyway, thanks all for joining me today. I'm glad you could join me and learn a little bit about sanding. If you want to learn more about how to sand your resin pieces or learn more about how to work with resin, please stop by resinobsession.com. We've got lots of information to help you with your resin project. We've also got the resin supplies that we use ourselves for sale in our shop. So we hope next time you need something for a resin project, you'll come shop with us as well. And if you haven't already, you can find us on other social media channels such as Facebook, YouTube, and Pinterest, where we share helpful advice as well. So thanks to everyone for joining me today. I do this every Friday at noon Eastern on Instagram. So I hope to see you again next Friday for a little lunch break with resin. See ya.